The Empire was warned. The Empire ignored humanity's borders. Then dangerous ships vanished. The grand fleet of the Skarn Empire moved through the dark like a slow river of steel. Thousands of warships, each one taller than a mountain, drifted past dead stars and empty moons. For 3,000 years, the Empire had grown by taking. It took planets. It took resources. It took the freedom of every species that stood in its way. No one had ever stopped it. No one had ever even slowed it down. At the front of this great fleet sat the flagship Voranth, a vessel so large that smaller ships could dock inside its hull, like birds returning to a nest. On its bridge stood Fleet Admiral Dresk Kaloran, a tall being with gray skin and 4 eyes that never seemed to blink. He had conquered 11 star systems in his long career. He believed, as most of his kind believed, that the universe belonged to the strong. "Admiral," said a voice from the communication station. "We are receiving another transmission from the human sector." Dresk turned slowly. "Play it." The screen flickered to life. A human woman appeared, dressed in a plain gray uniform. She did not look impressive. She did not look powerful. She was small compared to the Skarn, soft-looking, with none of the natural armor plating that most fighting species had grown over the ages. And yet her eyes were calm, steady, and completely without fear. "This is Fleet Commander Elena Reyes of the United Earth Defense Force," she said. "This is the 4th time we have contacted your fleet. You are approaching the border of human space. We are asking you one more time to turn back. This is not a threat. This is a warning. Cross this line, and you will not be able to undo what happens next." The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge. Then, laughter. Deep, rolling laughter from every corner of the room. The junior officers laughed the loudest, mocking the tiny image of the human woman, still frozen on the screen. "They warn us," said Dresk, a thin smile crossing his face. "A species with no empire, no colonies beyond a handful of worlds, warns the Skarn Empire to turn back." "Should we respond, Admiral?" asked the communications officer. "No," Dresk said. "Let them wonder. Let them watch as we walk straight through their little warning and take what we came for." Behind him, an older officer named Tovis Wren shifted uncomfortably. Tovis had served in the fleet for over 200 years. He had seen empires rise and empires fall, and something about the human woman's calm voice bothered him more than any threat he had ever heard. "Admiral," Tovis said carefully, "if I may speak." "Speak," said Dresk. "We know very little about the humans. Our scouts have gathered almost no data on their military strength. No one has ever seen their homeworld. No one has ever fought a real battle against them and lived to report the details. Every other species we have conquered we studied first. We knew their weapons, their ships, their weaknesses. With the humans we know nothing." Dresk waved a hand, dismissing the concern. "That is because they are weak, Tovis. A species that hides is a species that is afraid. Strength does not hide. Strength conquers. The humans have nothing to show us, because they have nothing worth showing." Tovis said nothing more, but the unease in his chest did not go away. Far beyond the edge of the Skarn fleet, in a place the Empire's scanners could not properly see, something was watching. It watched with patience, the kind of patience that only comes from a species that has learned, through hard and painful history, that patience often wins wars that strength alone cannot. Humanity had not always been calm. Centuries ago, when the first alien scouts had been detected near the edge of the solar system, panic had spread across Earth like wildfire. Governments had argued. Militaries had scrambled. Scientists had worked around the clock trying to understand what kind of threat was coming. But that panic had not lasted forever. It had turned, slowly, into something else. Something colder. Something more useful. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for a day it hoped would never come. It had built its defenses not in the open, where any passing empire could see and measure them, but in the dark, in the quiet places between the stars, hidden behind clouds of dust and fields of broken asteroids. It had built weapons that did not look like weapons. It had trained soldiers who did not look like soldiers. It had made itself, on purpose, appear smaller and weaker than it truly was. Because humanity had learned something important. something it had learned over and over again throughout its long and bloody history on Earth. An enemy that underestimates you is an enemy you can defeat. Commander Elena Reyes stood in the control room of a station hidden deep inside a dead moon on the edge of human space. The room was filled with screens showing the slow approach of the Skarn fleet. Officers moved quietly between stations, checking numbers, confirming reports, speaking in low voices. "They are not slowing down," said a young officer named Marcus Webb, staring at the main screen. "No," Elena said. "I didn't expect them to." "4 warnings," Marcus said. 4 times we told them to turn back, and they just laughed at us. My father used to say, 'Pride kills faster than any weapon.'" "Your father was right," Elena said. She turned to look at the great map that filled one wall of the control room. Thousands of small dots marked the Skarn fleet's position. On the other side of the map, near the border, a much smaller number of dots marked human positions. To anyone looking at it for the first time, it would seem like an impossible fight, a giant against a child. But Elena had studied warfare her whole life, and she knew something that giants often forgot. Size was not the same as strength. A single giant ship was a giant target, and giants, no matter how strong, could not see everything. They could not watch every shadow. They could not guard every corner. And in those shadows and corners, something smaller could move. "General Voss wants an update," said another officer, holding up a communication device. "Tell him the Skarn fleet is 1 day away from the first marker line," Elena said. "Tell him Phase 1 will begin the moment they cross it." The officer relayed the message. Elena stood quietly, watching the screen, thinking about the years of planning that had led to this moment. She thought about the scientists who had worked in secret to build engines that could move without leaving a trace. She thought about the engineers who had designed ships that could hide inside asteroids, appearing on no scanner, showing no heat signature, no light, nothing at all. She thought about the soldiers who had trained for a war they hoped would never happen, learning to fight an enemy that did not yet know they existed. Humanity had never wanted this war. Every warning sent to the Skarn Empire had been sincere. Every request to turn back had been a real offer of peace. But peace required both sides to want it. And the Skarn Empire, like so many empires before it, believed that peace was something you took from the weak, not something you offered to them. Elena Reyes had grown up hearing stories about the old wars on Earth. Wars fought long before anyone had left the solar system. Her grandmother had told her about a great war in the last century, where small, determined groups had fought against massive armies, and had won, not through greater strength, but through cleverness, patience, and the refusal to give up. Those stories had shaped how humanity prepared for this new kind of war. They had learned that an enemy who thought they were weak would make mistakes, and humanity intended to use every single one of those mistakes. "Commander," said Marcus, his voice tight. "The lead ships of the Skarn fleet just crossed the outer marker." The room went quiet. Every officer turned to look at Elena. She took a slow breath. This was the moment. The moment 200 years of planning had been built toward. The moment where the warnings ended and the answer began. "Begin Phase 1, she said, quietly. "No mistakes." Far out in the dark, hidden inside what looked like nothing more than a scattered field of space rock, dozens of human ships began to wake. Their engines did not roar to life the way Skarn engines did. There was no flash of light, no burst of energy that scanners could detect. The ships simply began to move, slow and silent, sliding out from behind the rocks that had hidden them for so long. These were not the great, towering warships of the Skarn Empire. They were smaller, sleeker, built for a very different purpose. They were not built to stand in a great battle line and trade blows with an enemy fleet. They were built to slip in close, do exactly what needed to be done, and disappear before anyone even knew they had been there. Admiral Dresk Caloran stood on the bridge of the Voranth, watching the empty space ahead of his fleet with satisfaction. Nothing stood in their way. No fleet had risen to challenge them. No defense had appeared to stop them. Just as he had predicted, the human warnings had been empty words from a frightened, weak species with nothing behind them. "Admiral," said the sensor officer, "we have crossed into human territory. No hostile contacts detected." "Of course not," Dresk said. "There was never anything to detect." But far behind the fleet, at the very back of the Great Formation, Something strange was happening. A supply ship, one of the smaller vessels responsible for carrying fuel and food for the rest of the fleet, sent a brief distress signal. Then, silence. No explosion. No debris. No warning at all. One moment the ship appeared on every scanner, following its assigned position. The next moment, it was simply gone. No one on the bridge of the Voranth noticed at first. The fleet was too large, too spread out, for the loss of a single supply ship to draw immediate attention. It would be hours before anyone realized what had happened. And by then, 3 more ships would also be gone. Tovis Wren stood near the back of the bridge, watching the reports come in from different parts of the fleet. A missing supply ship here, a missing scout ship there. Small losses, easily explained away as equipment failure or navigation errors. No one thought much of it. But Tovis thought of the human woman's calm voice. This is not a threat. This is a warning. Cross this line, and you will not be able to undo what happens next. He looked out at the dark space ahead of the fleet, at the empty stars and silent void, and for the first time in 200 years of service, Tovis Wren felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt afraid. The Skarn fleet continued forward, deeper into human space, confident and unafraid, following a path that led directly into darkness they did not understand. Behind them, in the shadows they had never bothered to check, humanity watched, and waited, and began, piece by piece, ship by ship, to answer the warning the Empire had refused to hear. The war had begun, but only one side knew it yet. The Empire was warned. The Empire ignored humanity's borders. Then dangerous ships vanished. 3 days after crossing the border into human space, Admiral Dresk Caloran finally called a meeting to discuss the missing ships. By then, the number was no longer small enough to ignore. 7 ships had vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply gone, as if they had never existed at all. The meeting room aboard the Voranth was filled with senior officers, all of them uneasy, all of them trying not to show it. Admiral Dresk sat at the head of the table, his 4 eyes moving slowly across the faces of his officers. 7 ships, he said. Explain this to me. A young analyst named Petra Solun stood up nervously. She was in charge of fleet tracking and had spent the last 2 days going over every scrap of data available. Admiral, there is no clear pattern. The ships vanished at different times, in different parts of the fleet. No explosions were recorded. No debris was found. No distress calls were completed before contact was lost. No distress calls, Dresk repeated. You mean the crews did not have time to call for help? Yes, Admiral. Whatever happened to these ships, it happened very quickly. Dresk leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. Do we have any evidence of enemy activity? Any sign of human ships nearby when these losses occurred? Petra hesitated. No, Admiral. Our scanners detected nothing unusual in any of the areas where the ships were lost. This answer did not comfort anyone in the room. If there had been enemy ships detected, at least the fleet would know what they were fighting. But an enemy that left no trace, no signal, no evidence at all, was far more frightening than an enemy you could see coming. Tovis Wren, sitting near the back of the room, finally spoke. Admiral, I would like to suggest that we slow our advance, perhaps even pause entirely until we understand what is happening. Several officers around the table nodded in agreement, but Dresk's expression hardened. Slow down? Pause? Tovis, we are the Skarn Empire. We do not pause because a handful of supply ships have gone missing. This is likely nothing more than a technical failure, a flaw in our older vessels that has finally caught up with us. I will not let fear of shadows stop this fleet from completing its mission. With respect, Admiral, Tovis said, 7 ships lost to the exact same kind of technical failure, all within the same 3 days, in the same region of space we were warned to avoid, seems like more than coincidence. The room went quiet. Dresk's 4 eyes fixed on Tovis with obvious irritation. Are you suggesting the humans are responsible for this? I am suggesting we cannot rule it out, Tovis said carefully. Dresk stood up slowly. The humans have no fleet capable of striking us without being seen. Our scanners cover every corner of this region. If they had ships nearby, we would know. This is fear talking, Tovis, nothing more. I expect better from an officer with your experience. The meeting ended shortly after. with Dresk ordering the fleet to continue its advance at full speed, dismissing the missing ships as unfortunate but unimportant losses. Most of the officers left the room relieved that the matter had been settled. Tovis left feeling like he had just watched a man walk confidently toward the edge of a cliff he could not see. Far below the surface of a nearby asteroid field, Commander Elena Reyes watched a series of reports scroll across her screen. 7 Skarn ships confirmed captured. No human casualties. No detection by enemy scanners. 7 and counting, said Marcus Webb, standing beside her. They still haven't figured out what's happening. They will, Elena said. It's only a matter of time before they realize their supply lines are being cut, one ship at a time. What do we do with the captured ships and crews? Marcus asked. The ships go to the research stations for study, Elena said. The crews are treated fairly. Fed, housed, given medical care if they need it. We are not here to torture anyone. We are here to defend our home and to make sure the Skarn Empire understands, clearly and completely, what it costs to ignore a warning. Marcus nodded, though something about the operation clearly weighed on him. Some of them are just soldiers following orders, Commander, just like our people would be, if the situation was reversed. I know, Elena said quietly. That's why we're not killing them unless we absolutely have to. This isn't about revenge, Marcus. It's about survival. If we let this fleet reach the inner worlds, they will burn everything we've built, every city, every school, every home. We are not the aggressors here. We are simply the ones who prepared for the day someone decided to ignore our warnings. Marcus was quiet for a moment. My grandfather used to say that peace only works when both sides want it. He sounds like a wise man, Elena said. He fought in the Second Colonial War, Marcus said. He used to say that the worst thing you can do in a fight is let your enemy believe you're weaker than you are, because sooner or later they'll test that belief, and when they do, you'd better be ready. Elena looked at the screen again, at the slow, steady advance of the massive Skarn fleet, still pushing deeper into human territory, still unaware of exactly how prepared humanity truly was. We're ready, she said softly. Over the following week, the pattern of disappearances continued, slowly growing more frequent. A scout ship here, a fuel transport there. Occasionally, a small escort vessel patrolling the edge of the fleet's formation. Each loss was small on its own, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away with excuses about equipment failure or navigation error. But the numbers continued to climb, and even Admiral Dresk's stubborn confidence began to show small cracks. By the 10th day, 23 ships had vanished. Dresk called another meeting, this time with a noticeably different tone. Gone was the dismissive confidence of the first meeting. In its place was a tightly controlled frustration. 23 ships, he said, staring at the report in front of him. 23 ships, gone, and still we have no explanation. Petra Solun stood again, her voice steadier this time, though clearly nervous. Admiral, we have identified something unusual. In each case, right before contact was lost, there was a very brief, almost undetectable energy fluctuation near the affected ship. It lasts less than a second and does not match any weapon signature in our database. An energy fluctuation, Dresk repeated. From what source? Unknown. Admiral, it does not match any known human technology we have on file. In fact, it barely registers at all. If our sensors were not specifically tuned to search for it, we would have missed it entirely. Tovis leaned forward. This suggests a very advanced stealth technology, something capable of approaching our ships completely undetected, striking without warning, and disappearing again before we can react. Dresk's jaw tightened. You are suggesting the humans possess technology beyond our own? I am suggesting, Tovis said carefully, that we may have underestimated them. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. For 3,000 years, the Skarn Empire had been the most powerful force in this part of the galaxy. No species had ever possessed technology that could rival their own. The idea that a small, seemingly primitive species like humanity might have surpassed them in even one area was almost impossible to accept. But the numbers did not lie. 23 ships were gone, and the Empire had no answer for why. What do you suggest we do, Tovis? Dresk asked, his voice quieter now, less certain. I suggest we send a formal request for renewed contact with the human government, Tovis said. I suggest we ask them, directly, what is happening to our ships, and I suggest we prepare for the possibility that this fleet may be facing a threat greater than anything we have encountered before." Dresk was silent for a long moment. His pride, built over centuries of easy conquest, fought against the simple truth sitting in front of him. Finally he nodded, slowly, reluctantly. "Send the request, but continue the advance. I will not halt this fleet based on missing supply ships and unexplained sensor readings alone." Tovis nodded, though he knew, deep down, that this compromise would not be enough. The humans had given a clear warning: turn back, or face the consequences. The Empire had chosen to ignore that warning, and now, piece by piece, ship by ship, those consequences were beginning to arrive. That night, aboard the hidden human station, Elena Reyes received word that the Skarn Empire had sent a new transmission, requesting direct contact with Earth's government to discuss the disappearances. She read the message twice, then set it down, and looked out at the star field beyond the viewport. "They're finally starting to understand," Marcus said, standing beside her. "Not yet," Elena said. "They're starting to worry. Understanding will come later, when they realize just how much bigger this problem is going to get." "Should we respond to their request?" Marcus asked. Elena thought for a long moment. "Not yet," she said finally. "Let them keep guessing a little longer. Let them keep pushing forward, deeper into territory they don't understand. When we do respond, I want it to be with enough proof behind our words that they cannot possibly ignore us again." She turned back to the screen, watching the slow, steady progress of the Skarn fleet as it continued its advance, unaware that every step forward was a step deeper into a trap 200 years in the making. The Empire had been warned once. Soon it would be reminded, in a way it would never forget, exactly what that warning had meant. The Empire was warned. The Empire ignored humanity's borders. Then, dangerous ships vanished. By the third week, the Skarn fleet had lost 61 ships. Admiral Dresk Kaloran no longer laughed at the mention of human warnings. He no longer dismissed the missing vessels as technical failures. The truth had become impossible to avoid, no matter how much his pride wanted to reject it. Something out in the dark was hunting his fleet, and it was doing so with a skill and patience that unsettled even his most experienced officers. He ordered a change in strategy. No longer would ships travel alone, even for short supply runs. Every vessel would move in groups, escorted, protected, watched from multiple angles. Sensor arrays were adjusted to search constantly for the strange energy signature Petra Solon had identified. Extra patrols were assigned to guard the edges of the fleet's formation. For a few days, it seemed to work. No ships vanished. Dresk allowed himself a small measure of relief, believing that his new precautions had solved the problem. Then, on the fourth night after the new orders were given, an entire escort group of 12 warships vanished at once. The reaction on the Voranth was immediate and severe. Alarms rang through the ship. Officers rushed between stations, desperately trying to re-establish contact with the missing group. Nothing worked. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors. 12 warships, each one heavily armed and specifically assigned to protect against the very threat they were meant to stop, had simply disappeared. Dresk stood on the bridge, staring at the empty space where the escort group's markers had once been displayed on the tactical map. For the first time in his long career, he felt something close to genuine fear. "Get me Tovis," he said quietly. Tovis arrived a few minutes later, his expression grim. He had already heard the news. 12 ships,
Screes,
Dresk said, not looking away from the screen, heavily armed, specifically positioned to guard against this threat. Gone in an instant. "Yes, Admiral," Tovis said. "How is this possible?" Dresk's voice was quieter now, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for so long. "How can an enemy strike 12 warships at once, without warning, without leaving any trace, and vanish without a single one of our scanners detecting them?" Tovis considered his answer carefully. "Admiral, I believe we are dealing with a species that has spent a very long time preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. Perhaps centuries. They have built technology, tactics, and strategies specifically designed to defeat an enemy far larger and more powerful than themselves. We are not simply facing a weaker opponent who got lucky. We are facing an opponent who has planned for this exact moment." Dresk was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked the question that had been building in his mind since the meeting had begun. Should we retreat? The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. The Skarn Empire did not retreat. In 3,000 years of conquest, no fleet under the Empire's banner had ever turned back from a fight. But the numbers did not care about pride, and Tovis knew that pretending otherwise would only cost more lives. I believe, Tovis said slowly, that we should attempt renewed contact with the human government before making any further decisions. We were warned once, and we ignored it. Perhaps it is time we listened. Dresk nodded, the movement slow and heavy, as if it cost him something deep to admit defeat, even partially. Send the request again. Full priority this time. I want a response within the day. The request reached Elena Reyes's station within the hour. She read it twice, then called Marcus Webb and several other senior officers into the control room. They're asking for a direct conversation, she said, holding up the message. Admiral Dresk Kaloran himself is requesting to speak with a representative of Earth's government. Are we going to respond? Marcus asked. Yes, Elena said. It's time. She turned to General Aiden Voss, an older man who had led human defense forces for over 20 years. He had been the one to approve the original warnings sent to the Skarn fleet, and he had personally overseen the 200 years of preparation that had led to this moment. General, Elena said, how would you like to proceed? Voss considered the question carefully. We respond, but we do not grovel, and we do not gloat. We tell them the truth. We warned them. They ignored us. Now they are facing the consequences of that choice. We offer them a path forward, but only if they are willing to respect the boundaries we set. And if they refuse? Marcus asked. Voss's expression hardened. Then we continue exactly as we have been, one ship at a time, until there is nothing left of that fleet but empty space. Elena nodded and began preparing the transmission. This time, there would be no simple warning delivered by a calm officer reading from a prepared script. This time, humanity would show the Empire exactly what it was dealing with. Aboard the Voranth, the bridge crew waited anxiously as the response finally arrived. The screen flickered to life, and this time, it was not Elena Reyes who appeared, but General Aiden Voss himself, standing in a room that gave away nothing about its location, surrounded by officers whose faces remained carefully neutral. Admiral Dresk Kaloran, Voss said, his voice calm but firm. You requested contact. I am listening. Dresk straightened, gathering what remained of his composure. General Voss, your forces have destroyed or captured over 70 of my ships. I am requesting an explanation, and I am requesting a path toward ending this conflict before it grows any further. You were warned, Voss said simply. 4 times, before your fleet ever crossed our border, we asked you to turn back. We told you clearly that crossing that line would lead to consequences you could not undo. You chose to ignore every single warning. We did not believe the warnings represented a genuine threat, Dresk admitted, the words clearly difficult for him to say. We had no evidence of your military capabilities. We assumed, based on available information, that your species posed no real danger to a fleet of our size and strength. That was your mistake, Voss said. Humanity does not make idle threats, Admiral. When we say something, we mean it. We do not enjoy conflict. We do not seek out war. But we will defend our home. And we will defend it with everything we have built over the last 2 centuries, in preparation for exactly this moment. Dresk was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from us? We want you to leave, Voss said, immediately and completely. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of your fleet, out of human territory. In exchange, we will return your captured crew members unharmed, and we will cease all further action against your remaining ships. And if I refuse? Dresk asked, though the question carried none of the arrogance it might have held weeks earlier. Voss's expression did not change. Then we will continue exactly as we have been doing. 1 ship at a time, Admiral, until your entire fleet is gone. We have the patience for it. The question is whether you have the ships to spare. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy. Every officer on the Voranth's bridge watched their admiral, waiting to see how he would respond to an ultimatum delivered so calmly, so completely without fear, by a species they had dismissed as weak only weeks earlier. Finally, Dresk spoke. I will need to consult with the Imperial Council before making a final decision. This is not a choice I can make alone. You have 3 days, Voss said. After that, we resume full operations against your fleet, without exception. The transmission ended. Dresk stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the now dark screen. Tovis approached slowly, his own expression unreadable. 3 days, Dresk said quietly. 3 days, to decide whether the Skarn Empire retreats from a species we called weak only weeks ago. Admiral, Tovis said carefully, perhaps it is not weakness we should have feared. Perhaps it was patience. We conquered 1,000 worlds by moving quickly, striking hard and overwhelming our enemies before they could prepare a proper defense. But the humans did not need to move quickly. They had 200 years to prepare for us, and they used every single one of those years wisely. Dresk did not respond immediately. He simply stared out at the vast darkness beyond the viewport, at the stars that stretched endlessly in every direction, thinking about the warning he had laughed at, the woman's calm voice he had dismissed, and the 71 ships that now floated silently somewhere in the void, lost to an enemy the Empire had never bothered to understand. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Skarn Empire was not simply facing an enemy, it was facing the consequences of its own arrogance, and there was no fleet, no weapon, no strategy in its long and violent history that had ever prepared it for a moment like this one. The Empire was warned. The Empire ignored humanity's borders. Then dangerous ships vanished. The Imperial Council did not answer quickly. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5, with no word from the heart of the Skarn Empire. Admiral Dresk Kelleran waited aboard the Voranth, watching his fleet grow smaller with each passing day. Small groups of ships continued to vanish, despite every precaution his officers could devise. The Empire's silence was costing him dearly, and he began to suspect that the Council did not fully understand the danger their fleet was facing. On the 6th day, a heavily encrypted transmission finally arrived. Dresk gathered his senior officers in the meeting room and opened the message. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to High Counselor Vrenna Thal, the most senior member of the Imperial Council, and by most accounts, the true power behind the Skarn throne. Admiral Kelleran, she said, her voice sharp and cold. You have lost over 80 ships to a species we have never even properly studied. Explain yourself. Dresk straightened, forcing his voice to remain steady. Counselor, the humans possess technology and tactics far beyond anything we anticipated. Our scanners cannot detect their approach. Our weapons have never engaged them directly, as no ship attacked has survived long enough to fire a shot. I believe, based on everything we have observed, that continuing this campaign will result in the total loss of the fleet. Vrenna's expression did not soften. The Skarn Empire does not retreat, Admiral. We have never retreated, not once in 3,000 years. If we withdraw now, every species watching this conflict will see it as weakness. Every world under our control will begin to question our strength. This is not simply about one fleet, Admiral. This is about the future of the Empire itself. With respect, Counselor, Dresk said carefully, the future of the Empire will not be helped by the destruction of one of its largest fleets. If we continue forward, we may lose everything. If we withdraw now, we lose only pride. Vrenna was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing the truth of his words against the weight of imperial tradition. Finally she spoke. I will not authorize a full withdrawal, Admiral, but I will authorize a change in approach. You will attempt one final show of strength before any further negotiation. Gather your remaining forces, identify the source of these attacks, and destroy it. Show the humans, and every species watching, that the Skarn Empire cannot be defeated by tricks and shadows. Dresk felt a chill run through him at the order, though he understood the political reality behind it. The Council could not simply retreat without some attempt at a decisive strike. Pride demanded at least one more effort, regardless of the cost. I understand, Counselor, he said. It will be done. The transmission ended, and Dresk turned to his officers, his expression grim. You heard the Council. We are ordered to make one final attempt to locate and destroy the source of these attacks. Tovis stepped forward, his voice careful but urgent. Admiral, With respect, we do not even know what we are fighting. How can we destroy an enemy we cannot see? We concentrate our forces, Dresk said. No more scattered patrols, no more small groups moving independently. We combine the fleet into a single formation, strong enough that whatever is attacking us will be forced to reveal itself to strike effectively. It was a desperate plan, born from desperate orders, but it was the only option left. Within hours, the remaining ships of the Skarn fleet began pulling together into a massive, tightly packed formation, weapons ready, scanners at full power, waiting for whatever enemy had been picking them apart to finally show itself. Elena Reyes watched the Skarn fleet's sudden change in formation from the safety of her hidden command station. The scattered, spread-out fleet had suddenly pulled itself into a single, dense cluster, every ship close together, every weapon system active. They're consolidating, Marcus said, studying the tactical display. Looks like they're trying to force us into the open. Smart move, actually, Elena said. If they can't hide from us, at least they can make it harder for us to pick them apart quietly. What's our response? Marcus asked. Elena studied the formation carefully. It was a strong defensive position, difficult to approach without detection, difficult to strike without significant risk, but it was also, in its own way, exactly what humanity had been waiting for. General Voss, Elena said, turning to the older officer standing nearby. They've given us exactly what we need. Voss studied the display. A small, satisfied smile crossed his weathered face. They have indeed. A single, concentrated target, sitting still, waiting for us to come to them. Should we proceed with the full operation? Elena asked. Voss nodded slowly. It's time. Bring in the Leviathan group. Deep within the asteroid field surrounding the Skarn fleet's new position, something far larger than the small stealth ships that had been picking off individual vessels began to stir. These were not the same kind of ship that had caused the earlier disappearances. These were something else entirely. Something humanity had built specifically for a moment like this one, hidden away for decades, waiting for the day it might be needed. 6 enormous vessels, each one roughly the size of the Voranth itself, began to move slowly out from their hiding places among the rocks and debris. Unlike the small stealth ships, these vessels were not designed purely for hiding. They were designed for one purpose only: to end a battle quickly and decisively, the moment the enemy revealed a target worth striking. Admiral Dresk stood on the bridge of the Voranth, watching the empty space around his consolidated fleet with growing unease. Hours passed with no sign of attack. The waiting was almost worse than the losses themselves, a slow, creeping tension that filled every corner of the ship. Admiral, said the sensor officer suddenly, her voice tight with alarm. We are detecting massive energy readings, multiple contacts, approaching from 6 different directions. Dresk's eyes widened. Show me. The tactical display filled with new markers, 6 enormous shapes emerging from the darkness surrounding the fleet, larger than anything the Empire had previously detected from the humans. For weeks, the Skarn Empire had believed itself to be facing small, hidden ships striking quietly from the shadows. They had never imagined the humans possessed vessels of this size. Impossible, Dresk whispered. Admiral, orders, asked his weapons officer, voice trembling slightly. Dresk hesitated for only a moment before his training took over. All ships, weapons free. Target the incoming vessels. Do not let them close the distance. The Skarn fleet opened fire, hundreds of weapon systems lighting up the darkness with brilliant flashes of destructive energy. The 6 human vessels absorbed the barrage, their shields flaring brightly under the assault, but they did not slow, did not retreat, and did not stop their steady advance. Their shields are holding, the weapons officer reported, disbelief clear in his voice. Minimal damage detected. Dresk watched in growing horror as his fleet's combined firepower, enough to level entire planets, failed to significantly damage the approaching human ships. Whatever technology had allowed those ships to remain hidden for so long had also given them defenses far beyond anything the Empire had encountered before. The 6 human vessels continued their approach, moving into optimal firing range with calm, methodical precision. When they finally opened fire, the response was devastating. Beams of concentrated energy tore through the Skarn formation, striking with surgical precision at engine systems, weapon arrays, and command centers. Ships exploded across the tactical display, their destruction lighting up the darkness like brief, terrible stars. The Skarn fleet, so confident only weeks earlier, found itself being systematically dismantled by an enemy whose true strength it had never even suspected. "Admiral, we're losing ships faster than we can count," the weapons officer shouted over the chaos filling the bridge. Dresk stared at the display, watching his once mighty fleet crumble before an enemy that had, until this very moment, seemed content to strike quietly and disappear. Now, that same enemy had revealed a strength capable of matching, and perhaps exceeding, the Skarn Empire's own military might. "All ships retreat," Dresk finally ordered, his voice hoarse. "Full retreat, immediately." But even as the order went out, he knew, deep in his heart, that the damage had already been done. The Skarn Empire had come to human space believing itself unstoppable, confident in its own strength, dismissive of every warning it had received. Now, surrounded by the burning wreckage of its own fleet, that confidence lay shattered, along with any illusion that humanity had ever been the weaker species in this conflict. The humans had not simply been hiding. They had been waiting, patiently, for exactly this moment, for the chance to show the Skarn Empire, in the clearest way possible, exactly what it meant to ignore a warning from a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for war it never wanted to fight. The Empire was warned. The Empire ignored humanity's borders. Then dangerous ships vanished. The retreat order came too late to save most of the fleet. By the time the surviving Skarn ships managed to break away from the human formation, over half of the original force had been destroyed or captured. The Voranth itself had taken heavy damage, its outer hull scarred and burning in several sections, its weapon systems reduced to a fraction of their original strength. Admiral Dresk stood on the damaged bridge, surrounded by the sounds of alarms and the smell of burning metal, watching the 6 human vessels hold their position, rather than pursue the retreating fleet. They had made their point. They did not need to destroy every remaining ship to prove what they were capable of. "Admiral," Tovis said quietly, approaching through the smoke and chaos, "we are receiving another transmission from the human fleet." Dresk nodded slowly, too exhausted and too humbled to summon any of his earlier arrogance. "Play it." The screen flickered to life, showing General Voss once again, standing calm and composed, exactly as he had during their previous conversation. "Admiral Caloran," Voss said, "I trust this demonstration has answered your council's demand for a decisive strike." Dresk said nothing for a long moment, staring at the man who had just watched half his fleet burn, without showing the slightest hint of satisfaction or cruelty. "You could have destroyed us completely," Dresk finally said. "Why didn't you?" "Because we are not interested in destruction for its own sake," Voss said. "We warned your empire clearly, multiple times, before this conflict ever began. We told you what would happen if you crossed our border. You chose to test that warning, and now you have your answer. But we do not wish for endless war, Admiral. We wish for peace, on fair terms, respected by both sides." "What terms?" Dresk asked. "Full withdrawal of all remaining forces from human territory," Voss said. "A formal recognition of our borders, agreed to by your Imperial Council, and made public to every species under Skarn influence, and an end to any future attempts to test those borders. In exchange, we will return every captured ship and crew member unharmed, and we will consider this conflict finished." Dresk considered the offer carefully. It was, in truth, a remarkably generous offer given the circumstances. The humans could have demanded far more, could have pressed their advantage while the Skarn fleet remained crippled and vulnerable. Instead, they were offering peace, clean and simple, asking only for what they had asked from the very beginning. "I will relay these terms to the Council," Dresk said. "See that you do," Voss replied. "And Admiral, one more thing. Tell your Council that humanity does not want an empire. We do not want to conquer your worlds or take your resources. We want only to be left alone, within the borders we have clearly marked. If that is respected, there will never need to be another conflict between us. If it is not respected, know that what you witnessed today was not the full extent of what we are capable of. It was simply enough to make our point." The transmission ended. Dresk sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of everything that had happened over the past month. The confident, dismissive attitude that had defined the beginning of this campaign felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a hard-earned respect for an enemy he had once considered beneath notice. "Tovus," he said finally. "Yes, Admiral?" "You were right. From the very beginning. We should have listened to the warnings." Tovus did not gloat, did not point out how many times he had tried to raise these concerns. He simply nodded, understanding that some lessons could only be learned through hard experience. "What matters now, Admiral, is what we do with what we've learned." The Imperial Council received the human terms 3 days later. After the disastrous defeat of the Grand Fleet, even the most prideful members of the Council understood that further conflict with humanity would only lead to greater losses. High Counselor Vrenna Thal, though clearly unhappy with the outcome, formally agreed to the human terms, marking the first time in 3,000 years that the Skarn Empire had ever agreed to a boundary it did not set itself. News of the defeat spread quickly across the many worlds under Skarn influence. For the first time, species who had lived for generations under the shadow of Skarn conquest began to whisper about a small, distant species that had done what no one else had ever managed to do: force the mighty Skarn Empire to retreat. Aboard the hidden human station, Elena Reyes watched the final reports come in, confirming the Skarn fleet's full withdrawal from human territory. The captured ships and crew members were being returned as promised, and for the first time in over 200 years, the constant tension of preparing for an eventual invasion began to ease, if only slightly. "It's over," Marcus said, standing beside her, watching the last Skarn ships disappear from the tactical display. "For now," Elena said, "the Empire has agreed to our terms, but empires like that don't change easily. There may come a day when they test us again, or when some other power decides to try their luck against our borders. But we'll be ready," Marcus said. "We'll always be ready," Elena replied. "That's the whole point. We didn't build all of this because we wanted war. We built it because we understood, better than most, that peace only lasts when you're strong enough to protect it." General Voss joined them, looking out at the same screen, watching the last traces of the Skarn fleet vanish into the distance. 200 years of preparation," he said quietly. 200 years of hiding our strength, building in secret, training for a war we hoped would never come, and in the end, it took less than a month to settle. "Was it worth it?" Marcus asked. "All those years of sacrifice, just for this?" Voss considered the question carefully before answering. "Every life we saved today, every city that wasn't burned, every family that wasn't destroyed, that's what it was worth. We could have tried to build a fleet as large as the Skarn Empire's, tried to match them ship for ship, weapon for weapon, but we would have lost that race. They had 3,000 years of conquest behind them. We had 200 years and a choice to make, so we chose differently. We chose patience, secrecy, and precision over brute strength. Today, that choice paid off." Elena nodded, watching the stars beyond the viewport, thinking about the long years of quiet preparation that had led to this moment. Humanity had never wanted to be a conquering power, never wanted to build an empire of its own. It had only ever wanted to survive, to protect what it had built, and to be left in peace by those who might otherwise see it as an easy target. Word of the Skarn Empire's defeat spread across the galaxy in the months that followed, carried by traders, diplomats, and travelers who passed through the many systems bordering human space. Other powers, some large, some small, began to take notice of the quiet, distant species that had done the impossible, forcing the mightiest empire in the region into a humiliating retreat. Some saw this as an opportunity, a chance to seek alliance with a species clearly capable of defending itself against overwhelming odds. Others saw it as a warning, a clear signal that the borders of human space were not to be tested lightly. Either way, humanity's reputation across the stars changed forever in the weeks following the battle, no longer dismissed as weak or primitive, but respected, cautiously, as a species that had learned, through hard experience, exactly how to protect what mattered most. Admiral Dresk Caloran returned to Skarn territory a changed man, his once unshakable confidence replaced by a hard-earned humility. He would go on to advise future generations of Skarn officers about the dangers of underestimating an enemy, using the story of the human border as a lesson that would be taught for generations to come. An empire that ignores a warning does so at its own peril, and the ones who seem weakest are often simply waiting, patiently, for the moment they need to prove otherwise. On Earth, and across the many hidden stations and colonies that made up humanity's quiet, careful expansion into the stars, life continued much as it had before. There were no grand celebrations, no parades or declarations of victory. Humanity had never fought this war for glory or conquest. It had fought simply to protect its home, and having done so, it returned quietly to the work of building, growing, and preparing, patiently as always, for whatever challenges the future might bring. The Empire had been warned. The Empire had ignored that warning. And in the dark, quiet spaces between the stars, humanity had answered, not with anger or cruelty, but with the calm, unshakable determination of a species that had learned, long ago, exactly what it took to survive. The stars stretched on, endless and silent, and somewhere among them, humanity watched, and waited, and continued preparing, as it always had, for whatever the future might hold.